Howdy. So we're close to the end of my 30 days. This is day number 29. And I decided I'm going to tell you another story. And this one is actually part of a story that I told a couple of videos ago where I talked about morality and my word of loyalty. And I mentioned that there were 3 times where I felt my loyalty was violated. And it turns out, as I thought about it, I was wrong. It was actually 4 times. And I'm going to talk about the second time that it happened to me, which I had actually forgotten about. And I don't know why I forgot about it, because it was the most traumatic. Because after the first one, I got this second job. After the second one, I was basically kind of messed up mentally for at least 4 years. After the third one, I wasn't messed up at all. I actually just flowed. The fourth one, yeah, we'll talk about that one maybe another time. But I want to talk about the second one because this is important. There's a lesson here that sometimes, you find out that things aren't what you thought they were, even though you didn't think that they were. It makes no sense. Just go along with the story. So what happened is, after I lost my first job, where I was the regional director of a medical billing company, I went out of town on vacation with a friend of mine, went to Atlantic City, actually got to stand kind of next to Evander Holyfield and George Foreman, who were getting ready to have their first fight. And it turned out that at the time I was bigger than Evander Holyfield, which was really freaky. He was just like a couple of inches taller, but I was bigger than him. And George Foreman, they always talked about this like big fat guy. You know what? When you stood next to George Foreman, he was not really a big fat guy. He just wasn't. Yeah, maybe once he had everything else off, maybe he looked a little punchy, but no, he was not a fat guy. So just get that narrative out of there. Anyway, we went down there. We stayed for a week. I came back. And then there was a position that was open, and I had some people at my previous hospital recommend me for it. And so I became business office manager of a hospital in Rome, New York. And just to not necessarily toot my own horn, but I'm going to toot it anyway. In 18 months, we increased the revenue of that hospital by about $30 million, and we increased cash by about 19 million. Thank you. And the thing is that I was looking good. The hospitals looked good. Everything was looking good. Everything was looking great. I was like the golden boy, if you can use that term. And I was, we were just doing good. I was helping everyone else out because I had learned some things working for the physician billing company that I could now translate to the hospital. And so I had basically a lot of respect. We were doing really well. Then we had this meeting this one time. And the CEO of the hospital was talking about this unit that they were going to be adding to the hospital and how they thought it was going to generate all this revenue and how it was going to improve all this cash. And they had done some kind of study of the area and said that they were going to get in so much money from Blue Cross and everything was going to be great. Now, we had always had an open policy. If anyone had anything to say, you could say it. And so I said, I'm sorry, but I think that this is totally wrong. I don't know who you had do the study, but there's just no way in the world that you're going to get that much money from Blue Cross. Based on the type of thing that you're looking to put in, at best, you're going to end up with Medicaid people or self-pay. It's just not going to happen the other way. I had kind of a background on this. I kind of had an idea. I knew what I was talking about. Well, what they did at the hospital, they said, nah, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do it. So they took my department and moved us off-site, downtown, which was okay, fine. They took us out. They took another department of mine and moved it downtown with us. Actually, now we were all in the same place. That was fine because part of my department was on the 1st floor, part was on the 4th floor. Now we're all in the same place. Then they spent all this money renovating this area. And they hired all these doctors and all these nurses way before they were looking to open a unit. So they get close to this thing, and probably about a week before I said, by the way, how are you going to bill for it? What charges do you have? They hadn't created any charges for the department. So I helped to create the charges, and I helped them set up a sliding scale. Basically, a sliding scale says that if someone comes in and they're self-pay, then you have a sliding scale set up so that you check their income, and it's possible that they may end up not having to pay anything if they're outpatient. So I helped them set up a sliding scale. They thought they were going to get all this Blue Cross money. Then it opened. And not only did they not get Blue Cross money, they didn't get the patients for the inpatient part that they thought they were going to get. As a matter of fact, it wasn't until 2 years after I left that they basically got their first inpatient patient. That shows you how bad an idea it was. And it also turned out that out of the outpatient people they got, almost all of them were self-pay. Not even all that many Medicaid. So I said Medicaid and self-pay. It was mainly self-pay, and most of them ended up not paying anything. So I turned out to be right. However, what ended up happening is that at a certain point, I noticed there were some things that were starting to change. They had brought in someone from, it was a military area, so she came in from another state, but they brought her in, didn't say really what she was for. And the next thing I know is that I am losing my job. The guy comes and says, well, I'm not sure that you were really up to it. I'm thinking, wait a minute. Last year, the audit came in here and they applauded me for everything that I had done and everything the department had done. And now you're trying to tell me that I'm not up to the job? Now, there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, it came out of left field almost, because they've been laying some other people off, other directors. And, I basically thought I was safe. Really, we were humming. We had a blip. I'm not going to get into what the blip was, but, my department had a major blip that happened, and we were on our way to recovering from it. Now I've lost my job. Now, I'm trying to figure out what happened. How the devil did I end up losing this job? We were going so well. So I ended up challenging it. I went on an affirmative action, thing. I filed it, and I almost won. I didn't win because 2 weeks before it was 6 months, the hospital fired the chief financial officer, the guy who fired me, and then they rehired him as a consultant. Really. That turned out to be the only way that they got saved from an affirmative action discrimination lawsuit. So there it was, 2 weeks, I lose that. Now, I'm in a weird spot because I've been making a certain level of money, and it was hard to get another position making that kind of money. And it was hard getting a job making less money because they saw the job that I'd been doing. And it was the first time I encountered the thing where they said, well, your skills and your education are too much. You're not going to stay at this job. You're going to leave. I needed money. It was leaving. I was paying my lawyer all this stuff. I was close to having to lose my apartment and move to Rochester with my parents. It was tough for a while there. I ended up getting a couple of part-time jobs, which brought in enough money so I could keep my apartment. I called all the creditors. I, set up payment arrangements with them, had to put my credit cards on hold, which was fine. I was already budgeting my money beforehand, but now I had to even budget it further. And one of the places I worked was at a gas station that actually had certain foods, so I could buy food for a discount there so I could eat. So I was doing okay. And it took a few years before I got another position like the one that I had had. And so now I'm starting to make money again, but I always had this thing on my mind. It was just bothering me. So this one time I went to a conference. This is like years later. I lost the position in 91, and it was 98. I'm at a conference up in Alexandria Bay, which is about an hour and a half, 2 hours up north. And I see a guy there who, when I was going through the lawsuit, he was initially part of the team that was representing the hospital, but by this time he was no longer there. And I remembered what happened is that we started the lawsuit, and then they had to put it on hold because the guy who was representing the hospital, because it was a city hospital, decided he was going to run for mayor. So they had to put it on hold for a while so they could find a new, quote-unquote, prosecutor or defender for the hospital. And they had to change judges. There you go. And they had to pay me during that time period, so I wasn't overly mad, but it was like, come on, let's get this done. So I ended up losing that lawsuit anyhow. But I thought about it later on and said, wait a minute. They were him and his company were part of the initial thing, but when they restarted it, they never came back. And so I saw the guy there, and I went over and I said, and I'm not going to mention his name, even though it's a long time later and everything has changed and, no lawsuits or anything, no one can go after anybody, not going to do it. So I go to the guy and I said, can you tell me what happened way back when? That's bothered me all these years. And I'm trying to figure out what the devil I could have done wrong. And he says to me, you didn't do anything wrong. Here's what happened. It turns out that when they put in this inpatient thing that they said was going to make all this money, it failed. It failed badly. And we had the operating sheet and we're looking at all these numbers and they blamed it on you and your department, saying that you weren't doing the job. And so we just went along with it because that's what they said at the time. And so after the first thing where it came up and then they had to put it on hold, we took another look at it and we realized what the problem was, and we realized you couldn't have had anything to do with it. It had nothing to do with you whatsoever. However, we had a confidentiality agreement, so we couldn't turn around and say publicly that it wasn't your fault, but we also couldn't go out there and say it was your fault because that would have been a lie and that would have put us in a liable position. So we basically had to back out. But you didn't do anything wrong. They used you as a scapegoat. So, wow. All these years, I thought it was me doing something that I just couldn't figure out what the devil I could have done. And it wasn't me at all. They used me as a scapegoat. He said, yep. And so here's the thing. He said that once we found that out and you had your lawsuit, and if you and your lawyer had been thinking about it, you could have actually subpoenaed us and had us come back in and we would have had to tell the truth, but you guys never thought about it. So, well, no, I never thought about it. It wouldn't have even occurred to me until years later when I was wondering what the devil happened. He said, after the city won the lawsuit because, it was a city hospital, city lawyer, city judge, we weren't winning. And then my lawyer, of all things, after we lost that thing, he got disbarred, which saved me from having to pay him because he had his own issues here in town. And they fired the CEO, they fired the head of HR, the people who conspired against me. They fired the consultant who ended up moving to Florida and getting out of healthcare altogether. And they brought in all new people. But by that time, they couldn't bring me back, because now I had this lawsuit that I had filed against the hospital and lost, even though all these people I had helped before. But there it was. I did nothing. It was other people who decided to try to use me as a scapegoat for their mess. And I tell you this story because quite often you will find yourself in a position where folks are doing something that turns out to be stupid, and instead of owning up to the fact that they messed up, they're going to try to pin it on someone else. Disloyalty. Here's me with my loyalty. Came in there, was doing all these things, helped them go through all this stuff, increase their revenue, increase their cash, got everybody trained, and then bam, no thank you, no nothing else, you're gone. And I still stick with what I said in that other video, which is, okay, now it's 4 things rather than 3, but still, loyalty has been big for me overall. But sometimes you have to work your way through things and say, okay, I didn't do anything wrong. I felt bad for the longest time. I had all kind of difficulty dealing with that. And then find out it really had nothing to do with me. Like I said, I recovered before that. I got another good job. I got another high-paying job, as a matter of fact. And at one point, I was the highest-paid director at the hospital that I was at. So it showed that I did know my stuff. It all worked out well. But it just took a load off my mind, realizing that I didn't mess anything up. I was just a scapegoat. Sometimes it's not your fault. It does help to think through things. Some folks will say, well, you need to forgive those other people. I ain't forgiving none of them. You know what? The thoughts that I had in my mind of what I really wanted to do to some of those folks that I'm glad I didn't do. And I mentioned something in the other video where I said I talked to a friend of mine, and he says, if you want to, we can get some guys and we can go do some stuff. And I knew we could get those guys, and that was scary. I said, whoa, how close am I to that? But that was loyalty. And it's like, okay, thank you for that. You've given me some perspective. Let me back off on that kind of anger. Anyhow, that was this story. There you go. I got one more video to go. And then that's 30 in a row. My name is Mitch Mitchell. I hope you liked it. I hope you subscribe. I hope you hit the notification bell. Y'all take care.